The ER was loud until it wasn't. A Marine commander stood rigid beside a trauma bay, his rank stitched sharp against blood-darkened fabric. Orders had always bent rooms to his voice. Tonight they didn't. Across from him, a trauma physician with steady hand said nothing at all. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply lifted her sleeve. The air collapsed into silence. Monitors continued their metronome beeps. Nurses froze mid-step. Somewhere down the hall, a gurney rattled distant and unreal. The commander's jaw locked. His eyes, trained for chaos, calibrated for command, lost their edge. He went still, as if the floor had dropped away beneath decades of certainty. No one knew what he saw. No one dared ask. What they did know was this authority had just changed hands without a word being spoken. And whatever truth lay beneath that sleeve had the power to undo a lifetime of command. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Different places, same moment. And if stories of quiet strength and earned respect move you, consider subscribing. Some truths don't shout. They wait. The ambulance doors burst open at 10:47 p.m., letting in a rush of cold air and urgency that cut through the emergency department like a blade. Rainwater streaked across the floor as paramedics rolled in a gurney at full speed, shouting vitals over the rising noise of alarms and footsteps. The man on the stretcher was broad-shouldered, heavy even in stillness, his camis soaked dark with blood near the ribs. Colonel Richard Hale, United States Marine Corps. Even before anyone read the name on the intake band, the posture gave him away. Jaw clenched, shoulders squared despite the pain. A man trained not to yield. 58 years old, male blunt force trauma from rollover, a paramedic called out. Possible internal bleeding. BP unstable. He was pulled from the wreck at mile marker 32. Hale's eyes were open, sharp, assessing. He scanned the ER the way he might scan a hostile zone, cataloging exits, personnel weaknesses. When he spoke, his voice cut clean through the chaos. "I don't want treatment here," he said. "Call Camp Pendleton. I want a military transport." A few heads turned immediately. The charge nurse hesitated. A resident slowed mid-step. The words Marine Colonel carried weight in this city, near bases, near flags flown year-round. Authority had a way of bending systems that were supposed to be neutral. At the foot of the gurney stood Dr. Evelyn Carter. She had arrived at the hospital only 6 weeks earlier, transferred from another state, her file clean, her credentials impeccable but unremarkable at first glance. Early 40s. Brown hair pulled back tight. No jewelry, no wasted movement. She stood with her hands, lightly resting on the rail, eyes already moving, bruising pattern respiratory rhythm, the way Hale guarded his left side. "Sir," she said calmly, "you've got signs of internal hemorrhage. You don't have time for a transfer." Hale turned his head toward her slowly. "Are you in charge?" he asked. "I am the attending trauma physician on duty," Evelyn replied. He looked her up and down, not crudely, not openly hostile, but with the practiced skepticism of someone used to command structures. He noted her lack of gray hair, her quiet voice, the absence of anything that announced dominance. "I'll wait for someone else," he said. "Someone with experience." The words landed heavier than they sounded. A senior attending Dr. Mark Feldman hovered just outside the bay. He'd been with the hospital for over a decade, and knew how politics worked when uniforms entered civilian space. He stepped forward, offering a careful smile. "Colonel Hale," Feldman said, "we're happy to accommodate." Evelyn didn't raise her voice, but she didn't step aside either. "Doctor," she said, eyes still on the patient, his systolic is dropping. "Another 10 minutes and we're risking cardiac arrest." Hale scoffed softly, breath hitching despite himself. "You civilians always think it's urgent," he muttered. "I've survived worse." Evelyn's gaze flicked briefly to the monitor. Blood pressure, 86/54. Heart rate climbing. "Maybe," she said. "But your body doesn't care about rank." A nurse nearby, young, barely 2 years out of training, felt a jolt of something like relief at the sound of Evelyn's voice. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Anchoring. Feldman cleared his throat again. "Colonel, perhaps we can stabilize you here." And no, Hale snapped. "I said no treatment." The word refusal hung in the air, thick and dangerous. Hospital policy was clear, competent adults could refuse care. But trauma medicine lived in the margins between law and consequence. Every second of delay narrowed the window. Evelyn straightened slightly, meeting Hale's eyes head-on. "Then I need you to understand the risk," she said. "You likely have a ruptured spleen or liver. You're bleeding internally. If we don't intervene, you could lose consciousness within minutes." Hale's lips pressed into a hard line. Pain flared across his face, brief, involuntary, but pride forced it back down. "I understand risk," he said. "I've commanded men in firefights. I won't be treated like a child in a civilian hospital." Around them, the ER kept moving. Another trauma rolled past. A child cried somewhere behind a curtain. Life and death didn't pause for pride, but pride often demanded that it should. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, not anger, but the weight of a decision approaching. She had seen this before, though never in this building. The collision of authority and medicine, of ego and physiology. Inside her, a quieter voice surfaced. "Stay with the facts. Stay calm." "Colonel Hale," she said evenly, "this isn't about who's in charge. It's about whether you walk out of here alive." For a fraction of a second, doubt flickered across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by something colder. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he said. "I outrank everyone in this room." The nurse's hands trembled as she adjusted an IV line. Feldman looked between them, sweat forming at his temple. The administrator on call had already been paged. Time was bleeding out with Hale. Evelyn exhaled slowly through her nose. She could feel the room watching her now, not loudly, not obviously, but waiting. Measuring. "All right," she said. "If you're refusing treatment, I need you to sign the form." She gestured to the clipboard. Hale stared at it then, at her suspicion sharpening. "You're just going to let me die," he challenged. "No," Evelyn said quietly. "I'm going to document that I tried to save your life." The words landed with more force than any raised voice could have. Hale reached for the pen, then froze as another wave of pain ripped through him. His grip faltered. The pen clattered to the floor. His vision blurred at the edges. Evelyn was already moving. "Pressure's crashing," she said. "Get me ultrasound. Now." Feldman hesitated. "Evelyn, he hasn't consented. He's decompensating," she cut in. "And if he codes, consent won't matter." For the first time since arriving, fear cracked through Hale's composure. He felt it then, the cold spreading under his ribs, the weakness creeping into his limbs. Training told him to endure. His body told him something else entirely. He opened his mouth to speak. The lights above seemed suddenly too bright, and as the room surged forward, Evelyn Carter stood firm at the center of it, calm, unyielding, already carrying a truth no one else in that ER could yet see. Colonel Richard Hale did not faint. That detail mattered to him later. Even as his blood pressure slid lower and the edges of the room softened, he stayed conscious, teeth clenched, eyes open, mind fighting to remain in command of a body that no longer answered cleanly. Years of conditioning refused to let him drift. Marines didn't drift. They held, but holding didn't stop the tremor in his hands. So Evelyn said closer now, her voice lowered, not gentler, just more precise. "Look at me." Hale forced his eyes to lock onto hers. For a moment he hated that she noticed everything, the sheen of sweat along his hairline, the shallow hitch in his breath, the involuntary guarding of his left abdomen. "You're losing blood," she continued. "You don't have the luxury of pride right now." "Pride." The word landed like a slap. "Doctor." Feldman stepped forward again, trying to reclaim the situation before it snapped in half. "Colonel Dr. Carter is one of our trauma leads." "She's qualified to, I didn't ask," Hale snapped, then winced as pain flared sharp and bright through his side. He sucked in air through his teeth. The room tilted slightly, then corrected. Evelyn didn't move back. "Your heart rate is 130, she said. "You're hypertensive. If you refuse care and lose consciousness, I will intervene under implied consent." That's not a threat. It's a fact. There it was. The line. Around them, the ER seemed to slow, as if the space itself recognized the moment when rules bent and consequences sharpened. Nurses paused. A respiratory therapist hovered near the door, mask ready. The administrator, Linda Morales, arrived at the edge of the bay tablet, pressed to her chest like a shield. Hale's jaw worked. He hated this. Hated being cornered by physiology. Hated that the person doing it was a woman who didn't look like any battlefield surgeon, he remembered. Implied consent, he repeated, tasting the words. "So you're just going to do whatever you want?" Evelyn shook her head once. I'm going to do what keeps you alive. Morales cleared her throat. Dr. Carter, we need to be careful here. This is a high-profile patient. If he's refusing, Evelyn didn't look at her. With respect, she said evenly, if he bleeds out on this gurney, we'll be answering questions a lot worse than a complaint. Hale watched the exchange through a narrowing tunnel of vision. Something unfamiliar crept in beneath the pain, not fear of death, but fear of losing control. On deployments, chaos was external. Here it was inside him, invisible and unstoppable. He swallowed hard. I want a military doctor, he said, again weaker this time. Someone who understands command. Evelyn met his gaze. There was no mockery there, no challenge, just something steady and unmovable. Right now, she said, your body outranks everyone. Silence followed. Thick, uncomfortable. The monitor beeped faster. Feldman shifted his weight, indecision etched into every line of his face. He'd built his career on navigating power, on knowing when to push and when to step aside, and right now he wasn't sure which was safer. Hale reached for the side rail, fingers curling white-knuckled around the metal. Get me the form, he said. I'll sign. The nurse moved quickly, relief and tension tangling in her chest. She placed the clipboard back into Hale's shaking hand. Evelyn watched closely, too closely. The pen scratched halfway through his name before his grip failed again. His head fell back against the gurney with a dull thud, eyes fluttering. Colonel, the nurse said sharply. Evelyn was already there, fingers at his carotid eyes on the monitor. Pressure's 80 systolic, she said. He's crashing. Morales stiffened. He hasn't signed. He's not competent right now, Evelyn cut in. Page the oar. Massive transfusion protocol. We're moving. Feldman opened his mouth to protest, then shut it. Something in Evelyn's tone left no room for argument. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. As the team surged into motion, Hale drifted in and out, fragments of sound breaking through the haze. Wait, he tried. I said I know, Evelyn replied, leaning in so only he could hear. I hear you. That, more than anything, unsettled him. They wheeled him toward Trauma Bay. 2 fluorescent lights sliding overhead like passing stars. Hale caught glimpses of faces, some curious, some tense, some openly uncertain. He had commanded battalions under fire, but this was different. Here no one saluted, no one deferred. The laws were written in blood pressure and oxygen saturation. In the bay, Evelyn took the ultrasound probe herself. Fast exam, she said. Upper left quadrant first. The image bloomed on the screen, grainy and gray. To untrained eyes, it meant nothing. To Evelyn, it was a warning flare. There, she said quietly. Feldman leaned in, squinting, his breath caught. Free fluid. Blood. The room shifted instantly. Ruptured spleen, Feldman murmured. Or now, Evelyn said. He won't last 20 minutes like this. Morales looked pale. We need consent. Evelyn finally turned to her eyes, sharp but controlled. We have it, she said. Implied. Document the loss of capacity. I'll sign. Hale surfaced again as they prepped him for transport. He felt hands moving, straps tightening, voices overlapping. He wanted to object, to assert something, anything, but his tongue felt thick, uncooperative. He locked eyes with Evelyn one last time. You don't know what you're doing, he rasped the words, more reflex than conviction. Evelyn leaned closer, her face calm, almost expressionless. Colonel, she said softly, you're not the first man to say that to me. There was something in her voice then, not pride, not defensiveness. Experience. Before he could ask what she meant, the gurney rolled forward, doors swinging open toward the surgical wing. The world narrowed to motion and light. Behind them, Feldman stood frozen for a moment longer, staring at the ultrasound image still glowing on the screen. He felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine, not because Evelyn had been wrong, but because she'd been right without needing permission. And somewhere deep in the hospital, a truth was moving with them toward the operating room, quiet, contained, and powerful enough to upend every assumption that had filled that ER just minutes before. The doors to the operating wing sealed shut behind them with a hiss that sounded final in a way few things ever did. Inside, the temperature dropped. The air sharpened. This was a different kind of quiet, focused, disciplined, stripped of ceremony. The OR didn't care who lay on the table. It cared only about time, blood, and hands that didn't shake. Evelyn scrubbed in without haste. Warm water ran over her forearms as she counted automatically, eyes unfocused, mind already 3 steps ahead. She felt the familiar settling inside her chest the moment when noise fell away and clarity took its place. Some people mistook that stillness for detachment. They were wrong. It was attention distilled. Across the room, the nurse from the ER, Emily Ross, stood at the supply cart, checking instruments with more care than necessary. Her movements were precise, but her breathing wasn't. Too fast, too shallow. Emily noticed. "Breathe," Evelyn said quietly, not looking up. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Emily obeyed, surprised by the steadiness of the instruction. "It helped," Dr. Emily said after a moment, his pressures still dropping. "I know," Evelyn replied. "We'll open fast." As anesthesia took over, Hale's rigid posture finally softened. The last thing he felt before darkness claimed him was the table beneath his back, and the unsettling realization that he no longer had any say in what happened next. Evelyn took her place at the head of the table as the final prep finished. Feldman stood opposite her, gloved and silent eyes flicking between the monitors and her hands. He had assisted on hundreds of trauma surgeries. He'd led dozens himself. But tonight he felt like an observer in someone else's rhythm. "Scalpel," Evelyn said. The instrument landed in her palm as if it belonged there. As she made the first incision, her thoughts slipped not backward into memory, but inward to the place she went when seconds mattered and failure was not an option. It wasn't nostalgia. It was calibration. She had learned this calm long before hospital walls. On long nights in other rooms under other lights, with different sounds screaming through the air. She didn't think of names or dates. She thought of patterns. The way bleeding revealed itself. The way bodies compensated until they didn't. The way hesitation killed faster than error. "Suction," she said. Blood pooled. Dark. Too much. "Confirmed. Splenic rupture," Feldman said, stating the obvious. "Clamp," Evelyn replied. "Then pack." Emily moved before Feldman finished speaking, anticipating the next step. She didn't know why she trusted Evelyn so completely, only that she did. The woman at the table moved like someone who had done this under worse conditions with fewer resources and more to lose. Minutes stretched thin. Hale's blood pressure dipped again. "Pressure's 68, anesthesia called out." "Transfuse," Evelyn said. 2 units now." They worked in tight coordination hands, passing instruments without wasted words. Feldman felt his earlier doubts erode under the precision unfolding in front of him. Evelyn didn't posture. She didn't rush. She decided. As they worked, something else became clear to him, not from any single move, but from the totality of them. Evelyn Carter was not improvising. She was executing. "Okay," Evelyn said after a long moment. "Bleeding's controlled." A collective breath moved through the room, unspoken but shared. Emily glanced at the monitor. "Pressure's stabilizing." Evelyn nodded once. "Good. Close in layers." As the immediate crisis eased, the OR returned to its quieter rhythm. The sharp edge of urgency dulled to a steady focus. Hale lay still pale beneath the surgical lights, chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. Feldman finally spoke. "You handled that," he said carefully. Evelyn didn't look up. "He handled it," she replied. "I just helped." Feldman hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing at him since the ER. "You didn't flinch," he said. Even when he refused, even when administration pushed back, Evelyn finished her final suture before answering. "Fear doesn't help patients," she said. "It just makes everyone louder." That wasn't an answer, not really. But it was enough to end the conversation. When they finished and stepped out of the OR, the hallway felt strangely wide. Time had stretched and snapped back into place. The clock on the wall read 1219A. Morales waited near the doors, face drawn tight. "He's alive?" she asked. "He will be," Evelyn said. "If there are no complications." Morales exhaled shakily. "The military liaison is on the way. They have questions." Evelyn nodded. "They usually do." As Hale was wheeled toward recovery, Emily followed alongside checking lines, adjusting drips. She glanced up at Evelyn, words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've never seen anyone stand up to someone like that," she said. "Especially someone with his rank." Evelyn met her eyes briefly. "Rank doesn't stop bleeding," she said. "Remember that. Emily nodded, filing the words away like something precious. In the recovery bay, Hale stirred. Consciousness returned in fragments, weight, then sound, then the dull ache radiating from his abdomen. He opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize. A monitor beeped steadily at his side. He was alive. The realization came with an unexpected mix of relief and anger. Evelyn stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing his chart. She felt it when his gaze found her, not tension exactly, but awareness, the quiet kind that preceded conflict. "You went against my orders," Hale said hoarsely. "Yes," Evelyn replied without apology. "You overruled my refusal." "Yes." He swallowed, pain flashing across his face. "You had no right." Evelyn set the chart down and stepped closer, her voice level. "You had a ruptured spleen and 6 liters of blood in your abdomen," she said. "You would have died." Hale stared at her, searching for something: defiance, satisfaction, regret. He found none of it. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why push that hard?" Evelyn held his gaze. "Because I've watched men die when someone waited too long to be polite," she said. "And I won't do it again." The words landed heavier than their volume suggested. Hale studied her face, the lines he hadn't noticed before, the restraint, the absence of any need to prove herself. Something unsettled him, then deep and instinctive. There was more to her. He felt it. But before he could ask, Evelyn reached for her badge, preparing to leave. "Get some rest," she said. "We'll talk later." As she turned, the sleeve of her scrub top shifted slightly, just enough for Hale to glimpse the edge of something beneath the fabric. A mark, a line, a hint of memory that tugged at a place in his mind he hadn't opened in years. His breath caught. "Doctor," he said sharply. Evelyn paused but didn't turn around, and for the first time since waking, Colonel Richard Hale felt the ground shift beneath him, not from pain or weakness but from recognition, approaching fast and uninvited. Colonel Richard Hale did not sleep. He drifted, slipped in and out of shallow half-consciousness, where pain dulled but never fully left, where sounds bent and stretched like echoes in a canyon. Machines breathed for him when his own lungs faltered. IV lines tugged gently at his arm each time he shifted. Every movement reminded him of how close he had come to losing control in a place where control had always defined him. And through it all, one image refused to fade. A sleeve, not fully lifted, not deliberately shown. Just enough fabric displaced to reveal the edge of something beneath ink scar tissue, or both. Something familiar enough to stir an old, buried instinct. Hale had spent a career training himself to notice details others missed. On the battlefield, details meant survival. Here, lying flat and exposed beneath fluorescent lights, the habit returned unbidden. That wasn't decorative, he thought. That wasn't random. When morning light filtered weakly through the narrow ICU windows, Hale's vitals had stabilized. His pain was controlled. His mind, however, was sharpening. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting his drip. "What happened to the doctor?" Hale asked, voice still rough. "Dr. Carter," the nurse replied. "She went off shift an hour ago. She'll be back later today," Good Hale said. Then after a pause, "Was she military?" The nurse hesitated. "Not that I know of, sir." Hale closed his eyes. The answer satisfied nothing. Down the hall, in a small staff lounge that smelled faintly of burned coffee, Evelyn Carter sat alone, forearms resting on her knees. She hadn't slept either. The adrenaline had burned off hours ago, leaving behind a familiar heaviness, a delayed echo of responsibility. She stared at the vending machine without seeing it. She knew this moment, the quiet after the storm, the part where questions started forming. Emily Ross pushed the door open gently. "Dr. Carter," she asked. "You've got a minute," Evelyn nodded. Emily sat across from her, twisting a paper cup between her fingers. I wanted to say thank you. Last night." "For doing your job?" Evelyn asked. "For showing me how," Emily said. The words landed unexpectedly. Evelyn studied her for a moment, saw the same raw commitment she herself had once carried before it had been worn thin by experience. "You did fine," Evelyn said. "Better than you think." Emily swallowed. "Dr. Feldman doesn't agree." That earned Evelyn's attention. "He thinks you overstepped," Emily continued. "Administration's nervous. The patient's a Marine colonel. They're worried about complaints, about liability." Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. None of it surprised her. Did I save his life? She asked. Yes, Emily said immediately. Then I didn't overstep, Evelyn replied. I did my job. Emily nodded, emboldened. I thought so too. There was a brief silence. Then Emily glanced at Evelyn's left arm quickly, politely, but not without curiosity. I hope this isn't inappropriate, she said carefully, but were you ever in the service? Evelyn's gaze flicked to the door, then back to Emily. Her expression didn't change, but something inside her tightened. I was, she said. Emily's eyes widened slightly. I knew it. The way you moved it wasn't just hospital training. Evelyn didn't respond. I won't tell anyone, Emily added quickly. I know, Evelyn said. The truth was, it didn't matter anymore. Questions had already been set in motion. By mid-morning, the military liaison arrived. Captain Thomas Reed, crisp uniform expression, professionally neutral. He spoke first with administration, then requested a brief update from the attending physician. Dr. Feldman volunteered. Evelyn watched from the edge of the nurse's station as Feldman spoke in low tones, gesturing once toward the ICU. Reed listened carefully, nodding his eyes, flicking briefly in Evelyn's direction before returning to Feldman. It was enough. An hour later, Reed approached her directly. Doctor Carter, he said, extending a hand. Captain Reed, Marine Corps. Evelyn shook his hand firmly. How's the patient? Stable Reed said. Alive thanks to you. She inclined her head slightly. That's good to hear. Reed hesitated, then asked, May I ask where you trained? Evelyn met his eyes. There it was, the question behind the question. Various places, she said. Reed studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Colonel Hale would like to speak with you when you're available. Evelyn felt the weight of the request settle into her chest. All right, she said. I'll stop by later. When she entered the ICU room that afternoon, Hale was awake, sitting slightly elevated eyes, sharp despite the bruised pallor of his skin. He watched her approach the way a commander watched an unknown variable. Doctor, he said, we need to talk. Yes, Evelyn replied. We do. She checked his chart methodically, giving him time to choose his words. You disobeyed me, Hale said. Yes. You embarrassed me in front of your staff. Yes. And yet he continued, voice quieter. Now I'm alive. Yes. Hale let out a slow breath. I don't like being overruled. Neither do most people, Evelyn said. He studied her closely. That mark on your arm, he said finally. I saw it. Evelyn paused. What did you see? She asked. Something I've only seen on a handful of people, Hale replied. Something that doesn't belong to civilians. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and deliberate. Evelyn reached up calmly and rolled her sleeve higher. Not all the way, just enough. The ink was faded in places, the skin around it lined with old scars. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't proud. It was functional. Intentional. Hale's breath caught. He knew it instantly. Unit designation. Medical Corps. A symbol earned under conditions no one advertised and few survived long enough to leave behind. His voice dropped. That operation. Fallujah. East Sector. Evelyn didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. Hale looked at her then not as a patient, not as a superior officer, but as a Marine, recognizing another who had stood in the same fire. I didn't know, he said quietly. You weren't supposed to, Evelyn replied. The room seemed to shift around them as if something unspoken had finally settled into place. Hale looked away, shame threading through his expression. I treated you like you didn't belong there, he said. Yes, Evelyn agreed. And you still saved me. Yes, he swallowed. Why? Evelyn met his gaze one last time. Because the oath doesn't end when the uniform comes off, she said. Hale said nothing after that. But the silence was no longer confrontational. It was respectful, and outside the room, unseen and unheard, the consequences of that recognition were already beginning to ripple outward toward authority, accountability, and a reckoning that would soon arrive with the thunder of rotor blades. The silence that followed Evelyn's words did not feel empty. It felt earned. Colonel Richard Hale lay back against the pillows, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if it might offer structure to a moment that had unraveled every assumption he'd carried into that hospital. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to rank memory or revelation. Outside the narrow ICU window, late afternoon light stretched thin and pale. "You could have told me," Hale said finally. Evelyn lowered her sleeve with the same deliberate calm she'd used to raise it. "It wouldn't have changed your vitals." Hale almost smiled at that. Almost. He shifted slightly, grimacing as pain flared. The motion brought him back to the present, to the incision beneath the bandages, to the weakness in his limbs. He hated that weakness. Hated that it had forced truth into the open. "I built my career on knowing my people," he said. "On reading situations. I didn't read you." Evelyn adjusted the IV pump eyes on the numbers. "You weren't looking for me." That landed harder than he expected. Outside the room, Dr. Feldman stood just beyond the glass, pretending to review charts while watching the interaction unfold. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the posture, Hale's rigid certainty, replaced by something quieter, something unsettled. He'd never seen a Marine officer look like that in a civilian setting. Emily Ross hovered near the nurse's station, torn between professional distance and curiosity she could barely contain. She'd seen Evelyn handle trauma before, but this was different. This was history colliding with the present. Inside the room, Hale turned his head toward Evelyn. "I want to make something clear," he said. "I didn't refuse treatment because I doubted your skill." Evelyn raised an eyebrow slightly. "I refused because I didn't trust the room," Hale continued. "Civilians, politics, optics. I've buried too many Marines after decisions made by people who didn't understand the cost." Evelyn met his gaze evenly. "And I've treated too many people who thought refusing help proved something." Hale exhaled through his nose. "Fair." There was another pause. This one less tense, more reflective. "You left," Hale said. "The Corps." "Yes." Why Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the door, then back at him. "Because I was tired of watching 20-year-olds die for decisions they didn't make," she said. "And because I could save more lives here than there." Hale nodded slowly. He understood that kind of calculus. He'd made similar ones, though they'd led him in the opposite direction. A soft knock interrupted them. Captain Reed stepped in, posture formal but restrained. Colonel Reed said, "Sir, there's been communication." Hale's eyes flicked to him. From where Quantico, Reed replied, "And the regional command." Hale's brow furrowed. About what? Reed glanced briefly at Evelyn, then back to Hale. About last night, and about Dr. Carter. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear exactly, but readiness. Hale noticed. "Captain," he said, voice regaining some of its old authority, "Dr. Carter saved my life. Anything else is noise." Reed hesitated. "Yes, sir, but there are questions about her file." Evelyn straightened slightly. "My file is accurate." Reed nodded. "It is, but it's incomplete." Hale turned back to her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Evelyn said calmly, "that some chapters were never meant to be read outside certain rooms." Reed cleared his throat. "Sir, a general is en route." He requested to be informed immediately. The word general shifted the air. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Which one, General Marcus Bell?" Reed replied. Hale's expression changed, not fear, not irritation, but recognition. "Bell doesn't travel for paperwork," Hale said. "No, sir," Reed agreed. "He doesn't." Evelyn said nothing. She already knew. As Reed left, Hale studied her again more carefully this time. "You knew this would happen," he said. "Yes." "And you still chose to show me?" "Yes." "Why now?" Evelyn folded her arms loosely. "Because you were about to refuse care and die to protect an idea of authority that wasn't helping anyone. And because sometimes recognition is the only language people in power understand." Hale considered that. He didn't argue. Down the hall, Dr. Feldman intercepted, Reed, voice low but urgent. "What's going on?" Feldman asked. Reed didn't slow. "You'll be briefed." "That's not an answer." Reed stopped and met his eyes. "Neither is what you did in that trauma bay last night." Feldman stiffened. "Excuse me. You deferred to authority instead of medicine," Reed said evenly. "That's being noted." The words struck harder than Feldman expected. "What, because she was military?" Feldman snapped. Reed's gaze was cool. "Because she was right." Feldman watched him walk away, a knot forming in his stomach. He thought of the moment he'd hesitated, of the way Evelyn hadn't. The realization settled uncomfortably. In the ICU, Hale shifted again, wincing. "I owe you an apology," he said. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "For what?" For treating you like you had something to prove, Hale said. For assuming rank outranked competence. Evelyn considered him for a long moment. Apology accepted, she said. But it's not the most important one you'll make. Hale frowned. Meaning, your people, Evelyn replied. The ones who watch how you treat those beneath you. They learn from it. Hale absorbed that in silence. A distant sound cut through the quiet, then low, rhythmic, unmistakable. Rotor blades. The sound grew louder, vibrating faintly through the walls. Heads turned up and down the ICU corridor. Nurses glanced toward the windows. Someone whispered, a helicopter. Evelyn's gaze remained steady. Hale closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, resolve hardening behind the pain. He came, he said. Yes, Evelyn replied. For you. For the truth, she corrected. As the sound intensified, a ripple moved through the hospital phones, buzzing administrators, straightening jackets, security adjusting posture. Authority was approaching, and everyone felt it. Hale looked at Evelyn one last time before the door opened again. When he asks, he said quietly, I'll tell him exactly what happened. Evelyn nodded once. That's all I ask. The rotor wash thundered overhead, now close enough to rattle the window panes. The hospital that had questioned her hours earlier braced itself for a reckoning it hadn't anticipated. And at the center of it all stood a woman who had already faced louder storms and learned long ago that truth, when revealed at the right moment, didn't need to shout. The helicopter touched down on the hospital helipad with a precision that spoke of long familiarity with urgency. Rotor blades slowed, chopping the evening air into measured beats that reverberated through concrete and glass. Staff gathered instinctively at windows and doors drawn by the sound like iron filings to a magnet. This was not a medical evacuation. There were no stretchers waiting. No shouted vitals. This was authority arriving unannounced. General Marcus Bell stepped out of the aircraft before the rotors had fully stopped. He moved with the quiet economy of someone who had learned over decades that the loudest presence was rarely the most effective. His uniform was immaculate but unadorned by unnecessary display. The rank on his collar did not need introduction. 2 aides followed him. A security officer from the hospital fell in behind, suddenly uncertain of where to stand. Bell did not look around. He already knew where he was going. Down in the ICU corridor, Colonel Richard Hale felt the vibration through the bed frame before anyone said a word. His jaw tightened. Pain flared beneath the bandages, but he welcomed it. Pain was honest. It reminded him that this moment mattered. Evelyn Carter stood near the foot of the bed, arms relaxed at her sides, posture neutral. She had changed out of her scrubs into a clean white coat, not to impress, but because she had learned long ago that clarity often arrived wrapped in formality. When the elevator doors opened at the end of the hall, conversation died instantly. General Bell emerged without ceremony. Administrators rushed forward, introductions half-formed and unnecessary. Bell raised a hand slightly, not dismissive, just sufficient. He scanned the corridor once, eyes sharp, then fixed on the ICU room at the far end. That one, he said. No one asked how he knew. Bell entered the room alone. Hale straightened as much as his condition allowed, instinct overriding pain. Sir, he said. Bell raised a hand again. At ease, Richard. Hale obeyed, tension lingering in his shoulders. Bell's gaze shifted briefly to the monitors, then to Evelyn. Dr. Carter, Bell said. Evelyn nodded. General. Bell studied her for a long moment. Not with suspicion, with recognition. You look well, he said. You look the same, Evelyn replied. Hale's eyes flicked between them, confusion tightening his expression. Bell turned back to him. How do you feel? The general asked. Alive, Hale said. Because of her. Bell nodded once, as if confirming something already known. That tracks. The room fell silent again, not awkward but heavy with unspoken understanding. Bell stepped closer to Evelyn, his voice lowered not out of secrecy but respect. You didn't have to show him, he said. I chose to, Evelyn replied. Bell's eyes softened slightly. I see. Hale cleared his throat. Sir, Bell held up a hand. I've read the report. Hale stiffened. Already Bell's mouth twitched. Some things travel faster than rotor blades. He turned his full attention back to Evelyn. You left quietly, Bell said. No ceremony, no commendations, no retirement speech. Yes, Evelyn said. You never filed the after-action reports that would have earned you a star. I filed what mattered, she replied. Bell studied her for another long second, then nodded. You saved lives, he said. And then you kept saving them. Hale felt something shift inside his chest that had nothing to do with his injury. He had commanded men through ambushes and extraction points. He had stood at memorials and folded flags. But this was different. This was humility confronting history. I treated her like she didn't belong, Hale said quietly. I was wrong. Bell turned to him fully now. His gaze was not angry. It was measured. Yes, Bell said. You were. The word hung there simple and devastating. Bell continued, voice even. You outrank her in title. You do not outrank her in service. Hale swallowed hard. Understood, sir. Bell shifted his stance slightly, angling himself so that anyone watching from the corridor could see the exchange clearly. This was not a private correction. It was a lesson. To be clear, Bell said, Dr. Carter acted within her authority and beyond expectation. Any attempt to question her judgment, delay her care, or diminish her role will be addressed accordingly. Outside the room, Dr. Feldman felt his stomach drop. Bell's eyes moved past Hale, past Evelyn, and briefly, deliberately met Feldman's through the glass. The message was unmistakable. Bell turned back to Evelyn. You never wanted recognition, he said, but sometimes recognition isn't about you. Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly. Sir, it's about standards, Bell continued, and standards require examples. Hale watched her closely, now seeing not the calm physician from the ER, but the Marine she had once been, the one who had chosen silence over spectacle. What happens now? Hale asked. Bell looked at him. Now you recover. And when you return to duty, you remember this moment. You remember who saved you. And you remember how easy it is to mistake quiet for weakness. Hale nodded. I won't forget. Bell turned toward the door, then paused. Doctor, he said over his shoulder. Evelyn met his gaze. Legend, Bell said. The word landed softly, but its impact rippled outward like a shockwave. Hale froze. The corridor outside went still. That word was not used lightly. Not in this context. Not by that man. Bell gave a final nod and exited the room. As the door closed behind him, the ICU seemed to exhale. Hale stared at Evelyn, awe and shame tangled in his expression. That word, he said quietly. He doesn't give it to anyone. Evelyn looked down at the floor for a brief moment, then back up. He gives it to actions, she said. Not people. Hale nodded slowly. I understand now. Outside administrators scrambled to recalibrate. Conversations shifted. Assumptions collapsed. The hospital that had nearly let politics dictate medicine now faced the weight of what it had almost lost. Inside the room, Evelyn turned to leave. Dr. Hale said. She paused. Thank you, he said. Not just for the surgery. For the reminder. Evelyn inclined her head once. Heal well, Colonel. As she stepped back into the corridor, eyes followed her, some with admiration, some with regret, some with newfound respect. The truth had arrived quietly without press releases or applause, and in its wake nothing in that hospital would ever be quite the same. The corridor did not erupt into noise after General Bell left. It did something worse. It whispered. Phones vibrated in pockets. Administrators leaned together in tight clusters, voices lowered, eyes darting. Nurses exchanged looks that carried entire conversations without a single word spoken. Respect once withheld recalibrated itself in real time. Dr. Evelyn Carter walked through it all without changing pace. She felt the shift, the way sailors feel a change in current, not by sight but by resistance easing where it hadn't before. Doors opened faster. Questions stopped halfway through forming. People stepped aside instinctively, not because of fear, but because something in her presence now carried undeniable weight. Dr. Feldman stood near the nurse's station chart, open pen, unmoving. He watched Evelyn approach and felt the full measure of his mistake settle into his chest. He had prided himself on experience, on knowing when to assert authority. Last night, he had mistaken proximity to power for judgment. Dr. Carter, he said, clearing his throat. Evelyn stopped. I owe you an apology, Feldman said. The words came out stiff at first, then steadied. I should have backed you in the trauma bay. I didn't. Evelyn studied him, not harshly, not kindly. Just honestly. You hesitated, she said. People hesitate for reasons. That's not an excuse, Feldman replied. No, Evelyn agreed. It's a fact. A beat passed. What happens now? Feldman asked. Evelyn considered the question. Now, she said, we take better care of the next patient. She moved on, leaving Feldman standing with a truth that couldn't be argued away. In the ICU, Colonel Hale lay quietly, eyes following the slow rise and fall of his chest. He had replayed General Bell's words over and over, each repetition stripping away another layer of justification he had worn for years. You do not outrank her in service. The phrase lodged deep. When Captain Reed returned, Hale didn't bark orders or demand updates. He asked questions, listened, noted the way Reed's shoulders relaxed as the dynamic shifted. She won't seek recognition, Reed said carefully. I know, Hale replied. That may complicate things. Hale's mouth tightened. Then we'll simplify them. Reed raised an eyebrow. I'll file a full account, Hale continued. No omissions, no euphemisms. Exactly how it happened. Reed nodded slowly. That will carry weight. Good, Hale said. It should. Downstairs, administration convened an emergency meeting that felt less like strategy and more like triage. Liability had evaporated, replaced by exposure. Emails arrived from military legal counsel, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. Linda Morales sat at the head of the table, fingers laced, pulse pounding. We nearly overruled the right call, she said. If Dr. Carter hadn't pushed, but she did. Another administrator cut in. And now we look like we tried to interfere. Morales closed her eyes briefly. We did try to interfere. Silence followed. We need to make this right, she said. Someone cleared their throat. Public statement, no, Morales said immediately. That's not what this is about. She straightened. This is about our culture, about who we listen to, and why. No one argued. Later that evening, Emily Ross found Evelyn in the supply room restocking with methodical care. They're all talking about you, Emily said quietly. Evelyn didn't look up. Hospitals talk. This is different, Emily insisted. They're listening. Evelyn paused, then met Emily's eyes. Listening is temporary, she said. Habits are harder. Emily nodded, absorbing that. Colonel Hale asked for you again, Emily added. He said it wasn't urgent. I'll go by, Evelyn said. When she entered the room, Hale looked more like a patient and less like a commander. The edges had softened. Pain still lined his features, but arrogance no longer guarded it. I filed the report, Hale said. Evelyn nodded. Thank you. I didn't do it for you, Hale added. I did it for the people who come after. That's better, Evelyn replied. Hale hesitated. Bell called you a legend. Evelyn's expression didn't change. That word means something where I come from, Hale said. It means something everywhere, Evelyn replied. That's why it's dangerous. Hale smiled faintly. You always talk like that, only when it matters. Outside evening settled over the hospital. The helipad lay quiet now, marked only by faint traces of oil and wind. The spectacle had passed. What remained was adjustment. By the next morning, policy updates circulated quietly. Trauma authority clarified. Chain of command language rewritten with medicine not rank at its center. No memos mentioned names, but everyone knew why the changes had come. Evelyn arrived for her shift, as she always did. No escort, no announcement, just a woman walking into an ER that felt finely aligned with its purpose. The first trauma of the day was a teenager thrown from a motorcycle. Chaos returned, familiar and unglamorous. Evelyn moved through it with practiced calm teaching when needed, deciding when required. At one point, she caught Emily watching her, not with awe, but with intent. Ask, Evelyn said. Emily blinked. How did you know when to push back? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She adjusted a monitor, checked a pupil response, then spoke. When the cost of silence is higher than the cost of conflict, she said. Emily nodded slowly. Hours later, as Hale was prepped for transfer out of ICU, he watched the staff work around him, efficient, focused, respectful. The hospital felt different now, not softer, sharper. He realized something then that unsettled him more than pain ever had. He had nearly let pride kill him. Not his pride alone, but a system's pride. When Evelyn stopped by one last time before his transfer, Hale met her gaze with something close to gratitude. "I'll carry this with me," he said. "So will I," Evelyn replied. He frowned. "Why? Because reminders fade," she said. "And I don't like forgetting." As she left the room, Hale watched her go, understanding at last why Belle had chosen that word and why Evelyn herself would never use it. Outside, the hospital traffic moved on. People lived entire lives unaware of what had shifted inside those walls. But inside, a quiet recalibration had taken place. Respect had been restored, not through force or fame, but through truth revealed at exactly the moment it could no longer be ignored. And the ripple was still spreading. The official review did not arrive with sirens or subpoenas. It arrived quietly, the way consequences often do when no one can pretend they aren't deserved. 3 days after the helicopter lifted off the helipad, a sealed email reached every senior physician and administrator in the hospital. The subject line was neutral, clinical, almost boring. Post-incident assessment trauma bay protocol compliance. Dr. Feldman read it twice before the meaning settled in. This wasn't a witch hunt. That made it worse. The assessment outlined timelines, decision points, and documented hesitations. It compared what was done with what should have been done. No names were highlighted in bold. No accusations were spelled out. The gaps spoke for themselves. And at the center of the timeline, steady, uninterrupted, was Dr. Evelyn Carter's judgment. Feldman closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, chest tight. He thought about the moment in the trauma bay when he had looked at her and chosen silence, chosen safety, chosen deference. He understood now that those choices had almost cost a man his life. Across the hospital, similar realizations were unfolding. Linda Morales sat alone in her office long after the staff meeting ended, the city lights flickering through the window behind her. She had spent years learning how to protect the institution, how to anticipate pressure from donors, boards, and political entities. She had never considered how often that instinct had overridden the people actually saving lives. Her phone buzzed. A message from legal counsel, military review completed. No fault found with attending physician. Recommendation internal corrective measures. Morales exhaled slowly. No fault found. The words echoed with relief and indictment. She drafted a memo that night. Not public, not defensive, honest. It acknowledged hesitation. It acknowledged fear of authority. It acknowledged the cost of both. By morning, it had been approved. In the ICU, Colonel Hale was strong enough to sit upright without assistance. The color had returned to his face, though the pain still lingered beneath every movement. He spent the quiet hours thinking something he had always done best after action, not before it. Captain Reed stood at the foot of the bed, tablet in hand. "The report's been filed," Reed said. "Your statement carried weight." Hale nodded. "It should. There will be changes," Reed added. "Not just here." Hale looked out the window, watching a helicopter, civilian this time, pass in the distance. "I used to believe command meant never being questioned," he said. "I was wrong." Reed said nothing. "I confused obedience with trust," Hale continued. "And I almost paid for it." Reed shifted slightly. "What will you do now, sir?" Hale turned back to him. "I'll teach my officers to listen when the quietest voice in the room says something that doesn't feel comfortable." Reed allowed himself a small smile. "That'll take." Downstairs, Emily Ross finished a double shift with sore feet and a full heart. She had seen more trauma in a week than she thought possible, but she had also seen something rarer: accountability without spectacle. She found Evelyn in the hallway outside the OR reviewing charts. "They approved the protocol updates," Emily said, unable to keep the note of excitement out of her voice. "They're making it official. Trauma Authority clarified. No more second-guessing based on status." Evelyn nodded. "Good. That's it?" Emily asked. Evelyn met her eyes. "That's everything." Emily laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Maybe," Evelyn said. "But patients don't need me to be impressive." Later that afternoon, General Bell's office sent a single-page letter addressed to the hospital board. It was brief, formal, unambiguous. It commended Dr. Carter's conduct. It affirmed civilian medical authority in trauma settings, and it closed with a line that could not be misread. The measure of leadership is not how loudly it asserts itself, but how readily it yields to expertise. Copies circulated, quietly, permanently. Feldman read the line again and again, feeling it settle into a place pride had long occupied. He requested a meeting with Evelyn. When she arrived, he stood. "I won't waste your time," he said. "I failed you, and I failed the patient." Evelyn listened. "I'm stepping down from trauma lead," Feldman continued, "at least for now. I need to relearn how to lead without hiding behind hierarchy." Evelyn studied him carefully. "That's your choice," she said. "Make sure it's not performative." Feldman nodded. "It isn't." She believed him. As Hale prepared for discharge, he asked for Evelyn one last time. She stood at the foot of the bed, hands loosely folded, the same way she always did. "I'm being transferred to a rehab facility," Hale said. "After that, back to duty." "Good," Evelyn said. "I requested a posting change," Hale added. "Training command." Evelyn raised an eyebrow slightly. "I want to shape what comes next," he said. "Not just command it." Evelyn considered him, then nodded once. "That's how change lasts." Hale hesitated. "They asked if I wanted to recommend you for recognition." And Evelyn asked. "I told them no," Hale said, "that you'd hate it." A corner of her mouth lifted. "You're learning." But Hale continued, "I also told them something else." Evelyn waited. "That if they ever want to understand what real service looks like," Hale said, "they should watch how you work when no one important is in the room." Evelyn met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "That's enough," she said. As she turned to leave, Hale spoke again. "Doctor," he said, "if I'd seen that sleeve sooner." Evelyn stopped but didn't turn around. "Then you wouldn't have learned what you needed to," she said. She left him with that. The hospital settled back into routine, but the routine felt sharper, now more honest. Decisions came faster. Voices were heard sooner. Authority learned to step aside when expertise spoke. No banners were hung. No interviews given. But something fundamental had shifted, and somewhere deep within the system, quietly, persistently, the lesson continued to spread. Change did not announce itself with celebration. It arrived disguised as routine. On Monday morning, the ER doors slid open and shut as they always had. Stretchers rolled. Phones rang. Coffee went cold in paper cups. To an outsider, nothing looked different. But beneath the surface, the hospital moved with a recalibrated spine, straighter, quieter, less afraid of its own judgment. Dr. Evelyn Carter felt it immediately. A trauma alert came in just before noon. A construction worker pinned under fallen scaffolding, blunt force trauma, compromised airway. The charge nurse didn't glance toward administration. She looked directly at Evelyn. "Trauma 1," she said. "You're led. No hesitation. No caveat." Evelyn nodded and moved. In the bay, the team fell into rhythm faster than they had weeks earlier. Orders were acknowledged cleanly. Questions were asked when needed and trusted when answered. No one glanced at the patient's work boots to guess status. No one asked who might complain. Medicine finally stood on its own. Across the room, Dr. Feldman observed from a distance. He wasn't sidelined. He had chosen to step back to watch how leadership functioned when it wasn't protected by title. What he saw unsettled him in the best possible way. Evelyn didn't command attention. She earned it, moment by moment. When the patient was stabilized and wheeled out, Feldman approached her quietly. "You didn't look at the clock once," he said. Evelyn wiped her hands. "I rarely do. That used to scare me," Feldman admitted. "Now I see why it shouldn't." Evelyn regarded him evenly. "Fear is useful," she said, "as long as it doesn't make decisions for you." Feldman nodded, absorbing that. Upstairs, Colonel Richard Hale packed slowly. Each movement reminded him of his limits, and each reminder humbled him anew. The discharge paperwork lay neatly stacked on the table, waiting for a signature that felt heavier than most he had given. Captain Reed entered, holding a small folder. "One more thing," Reed said. "General Bell asked me to deliver this." Hale opened the folder. Inside was a single page, an internal memo, classified markings stripped away. It outlined a new training module being introduced across multiple commands. Its focus was unexpected: civilian-military interoperability authority, expertise and trust in crisis environments. Hale exhaled slowly. "He's serious," Hale said. "Yes, sir," Reed replied. "He asked that you oversee its pilot." Hale closed the folder. "I will." Reed hesitated. He also said, This wasn't about correcting you. Hale looked up. Then what is it about preserving lives, Reed said. Including yours. Hale nodded once. Before leaving the hospital, Hale requested one final meeting, not with administration, with the trauma team. They gathered in a small conference room, nurses, residents, techs, a few attendings. Evelyn stood near the back, arms loosely crossed, expression neutral. Hale entered slowly, carefully. He didn't sit at the head of the table. "I won't take much of your time," he said. "I know you have work to do." Silence settled, not tense, just attentive. "I came in here believing my rank entitled me to control," Hale continued. "I was wrong. It entitled me to responsibility, and I failed it." No one spoke. "I want you to know that if I had gotten my way, I would not be standing here," he said. "Dr. Carter did her job when I tried to stop her. She didn't do it to prove a point. She did it to save a life." His eyes found Evelyn. "And because of that," he said, "I owe her my life." A murmur moved through the room, not applause, not surprise, recognition. Hale straightened slightly. "If any of you ever find yourselves pressured to compromise care because of who's watching, know that you have allies where you may not expect them." He nodded once and left. Afterward, the room remained quiet. Emily Ross finally broke it. That didn't feel rehearsed. Evelyn shook her head. It wasn't. By the end of the week, updates became practice. Trauma leads asserted authority without apology. Administration learned when to step aside. The ER didn't become softer, it became braver. And then inevitably the spotlight tried to return. A reporter called. Then another. Someone leaked the helicopter landing. Questions followed. Morales handled them with restraint. "No comment on personnel," she said. "The story is patient care." The calls faded. Evelyn was offered a leadership role, official visible, titled. She declined. "I'll teach," she said, "but I won't perform." Morales accepted it, surprisingly without argument. On Hale's last day in the hospital, Evelyn stopped by once more. "You're cleared for rehab," she said. "No heavy lifting, no heroics." Hale smiled faintly. "I've had enough of those." He hesitated. "I wanted to say, I used to think legends were loud." Evelyn met his gaze. "They usually aren't." "I'll remember," that Hale said. "So will the people you teach," Evelyn replied. As Hale was wheeled out, the hospital didn't stop. It rarely did. Another ambulance arrived. Another life hung in balance. Evelyn turned back toward the ER, already shifting focus, already present. Behind her, systems adjusted. People learned. And somewhere between authority yielding and expertise, standing firm, a quieter kind of justice took root. Not dramatic, not televised, but lasting. The kind that saves lives long after the helicopters are gone. The hospital did not remember moments the way people did. It remembered patterns. Weeks passed, then a month. The ER returned to its familiar cadence. Alarms, footsteps, clipped instructions, but the undercurrent had changed. Decisions were cleaner now. Questions surfaced earlier. When pressure arrived wearing titles or influence, it no longer stalled the room. It moved through it, acknowledged and set aside. Dr. Evelyn Carter noticed it most in the pauses, the half-second before a nurse spoke up, the breath a resident took before challenging an assumption, the absence of sideways glances toward administration when seconds mattered. These were small things. They were everything. On a late Friday shift, a call came in from a nearby interstate multi-car collision, multiple victims. The trauma bay filled fast. Blood noise, urgency. Evelyn took the lead without announcement. No one waited for permission. A resident hesitated over a scan order. "Say it," Evelyn said, eyes never leaving the patient. "I think we're missing a spinal bleed," the resident said. "Then say it louder," Evelyn replied. The scan confirmed it. Intervention followed. The patient lived. Afterward, the resident stood quietly near the sink, hands shaking. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Evelyn asked. "For not making me feel stupid." Evelyn met his eyes. "Fear doesn't teach, clarity does." He nodded, carrying that lesson with him. Across the country, Colonel Richard Hale began rehab at a military facility far from the hospital that had nearly become his grave. The work was slow and humbling, learning how to trust his body again, how to accept assistance without seeing it as weakness. During one session, a young lieutenant challenged a training scenario Hale had presented. "With respect, sir," the lieutenant said, "that approach assumes the civilian team will defer to us." Hale felt the familiar instinct rise, the urge to assert, to correct sharply. He let it pass. "You're right," Hale said instead. "What would you suggest?" The room stilled. The lieutenant blinked, surprised, then answered. Later, Hale wrote Evelyn a short note. "No letterhead, no rank. You changed more than one life. I'm trying to honor that." Evelyn read it during a break and folded it carefully into her coat pocket. She did not respond. Not because she didn't care, but because some acknowledgements were meant to settle quietly. At the hospital, administration finalized a new mentorship initiative. Trauma leads were paired with junior staff, not to evaluate, but to listen. The program bore no name tied to a person or an event. It didn't need one. Dr. Feldman volunteered to mentor first. In their sessions, he spoke less. He listened more. He learned how often he had confused decisiveness with dominance, how often his silence had taught the wrong lesson. One afternoon, he watched Evelyn guide a nervous intern through a procedure, her tone steady, her corrections precise but kind. "That's leadership," Feldman said later. Evelyn shrugged. "That's medicine." The truth was, she felt the weight lifting, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The hospital no longer felt like a place she had to brace against. It felt like a place that met her halfway. Still, some things didn't change. She avoided interviews, declined panels, passed on awards she hadn't asked for. When pressed, she said the same thing every time. Save the attention for the patients. Emily Ross watched all of this with growing clarity. She had entered nursing believing competence would speak for itself. She had learned how wrong that was. Now she saw something new, that competence when defended could reshape the room. One night after a difficult loss, Emily found Evelyn alone in the locker room, sitting quietly. "Does it ever get easier?" Emily asked. Evelyn considered the question. "No," she said, "but you get better at carrying it." Emily nodded. "I want to be like you." Evelyn looked up. "Don't be like me. Be better." Emily smiled through tears. "I'll try." As winter approached, the hospital faced another test, an influx of patients after a regional disaster. Resources stretched thin. Tensions rose. External agencies arrived with their own hierarchies and expectations. In the chaos, an official attempted to redirect care priorities. Evelyn stepped in calmly. "Show me the data," she said. The official hesitated. "There was none." "Then we proceed based on physiology," Evelyn said, "not optics." The room followed her lead. Lives were saved. No helicopters landed. No generals arrived. No one went silent in awe. And that was the point. Late one evening, after the last patient had been transferred and the ER settled into a rare lull, Evelyn stood by a window overlooking the city. Lights flickered. Traffic flowed. Life continued, oblivious to the small revolutions happening inside concrete walls. She rolled her sleeve down over scars that had long since faded from public view. They did not define her. They reminded her. When she finally left for the night, she passed a bulletin board near the staff entrance. Someone had pinned a handwritten note beneath a printed protocol update. "Speak early. Decide clearly. Respect expertise. No signature." Evelyn paused, then kept walking. Somewhere far away, Colonel Hale ended his day by correcting a junior officer, not for speaking out of turn, but for failing to speak soon enough. Change, he had learned, was not loud. It was practiced. And in a hospital that had nearly bowed to the wrong kind of authority, a quieter truth had taken hold, one that would endure long after memories blurred and names faded. The night the hospital lost power lasted exactly 11 minutes. To the city outside, it was an inconvenience, a brief flicker of lights, a few confused drivers slowing at intersections. Inside the hospital, it was something else entirely. Emergency generators kicked in with a low mechanical hum. Red lights glowed along the corridors. Monitors rebooted. For a moment, everything that was usually hidden dependency, fragility, trust, rose to the surface. Dr. Evelyn Carter was in trauma too when it happened. A middle-aged man lay on the gurney, cardiac complications layered on top of untreated diabetes. Nothing dramatic, no uniforms, no status, just a life balanced on attention and time. The lights dimmed. No one panicked. "Generators are live," a nurse called out. "Good," Evelyn said. "Let's keep moving." And they did. Hands continued their work. Voices stayed level. Decisions came cleanly, one after another. The patient stabilized. The crisis passed without spectacle. When full power returned, no one cheered. No one even commented. That was the difference. Later, as the shift wound down, Evelyn stood alone in the locker room. The hum of electricity had returned to its normal background presence, but she could still feel the echo of those 11 minutes, the way systems revealed their true strength only when tested. She sat on the bench and slowly unbuttoned her white coat. The mirror above the sink reflected a woman most people thought they understood. Trauma physician. Quiet, competent, unassuming. They rarely looked long enough to see the layers beneath. Evelyn rolled up her sleeve. The scars were pale now, softened by time. The ink had faded at the edges, no longer sharp enough to draw the eye unless someone knew what they were looking for. She traced one line with her finger, not in nostalgia, not in regret, in acknowledgement. She thought of the people she had been over the years. The medic crouched in dust and heat, hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. The surgeon working under generators smaller than the ones humming down the hall now. The doctor who had learned painfully that competence did not always protect you from being dismissed. And the physician who had stood in an ER and refused to step aside. Evelyn lowered her sleeve again. Across the city, Colonel Richard Hale ended his day in a quiet office paperwork spread neatly across his desk. Training command had been everything he hoped it would be: less glory, more responsibility. He read reports now, not for compliance but for patterns. For the spaces where people hesitated to speak, he stopped at one line in a junior officer's evaluation. Demonstrates initiative but defers excessively in joint environments. Hale picked up a pen and added a note in the margin. Encourage earlier engagement. Silence can be as dangerous as error. He leaned back, thinking of a woman in a hospital who had taught him that lesson without raising her voice. Back at the hospital, Dr. Feldman finished his last round of mentorship sessions for the week. He closed his notebook, feeling older and wiser in equal measure. Leadership, he had learned, wasn't about being right first. It was about making room for the right answer. Emily Ross left her shift just before sunrise. Exhaustion heavy in her limbs, but clarity steady in her chest. She had spoken up twice that night, once to question a medication order, once to suggest a faster intervention. Both times, she had been heard. She smiled to herself as she stepped into the cool morning air. Inside, the hospital administration finalized one last update to the trauma manual. It was a single sentence added quietly at the end of a section on emergency authority. In critical moments, medical judgment supersedes all non-clinical hierarchy. No footnotes, no exceptions. Days later, Evelyn passed Colonel Hale's old room, now occupied by a woman waiting for test results. The woman looked frightened, alone, hands clenched in the thin hospital blanket. Evelyn paused. "Hi," she said gently. "I'm Dr. Carter." The woman looked up, relief flickering across her face. "Are you the one who's in charge?" Evelyn smiled softly. "I'm the one here," she said. "That's enough." The woman nodded, breathing easier. As Evelyn walked away, she felt something settle, not triumph, not validation. Alignment. The hospital had not become perfect. It never would. People would still hesitate. Systems would still strain. Authority would still try to speak when it should listen. But now there was a memory in the walls. A moment when a man with stars on his collar went silent, not out of fear but out of recognition. And a woman who lifted her sleeve not to prove who she was but to remind someone else who they were supposed to be. That was the kind of justice Evelyn believed in. Not loud, not public, not engraved on plaques, but practiced. Every shift, every decision, every time someone chose competence over ego and care over control. She hung her coat, turned off the locker room light and stepped back into the corridor, another patient already waiting, another life already asking for her attention. And she answered, "There's a powerful truth hidden in moments we don't post, don't celebrate, and don't announce. Real authority isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause, titles, or fear. It shows up quietly when someone chooses to do the right thing, even when it costs them comfort, approval, or safety. In real life, the people who save us rarely look like heroes. They look like professionals who refuse to step aside when it matters most." This story isn't about rank versus rank. It's about ego versus responsibility, about how dangerous silence can be when it's used to protect pride instead of people, and about how courage sometimes looks like standing still while everyone else expects you to move. At some point, all of us will be in a room where speaking up feels risky, where staying quiet feels easier, where authority, reputation, or pressure tries to decide for us. In that moment, the question isn't who has power, it's who is willing to carry the weight of the outcome. The world doesn't change because of loud declarations. It changes because ordinary people choose competence over ego, truth over comfort, and service over pride, again and again. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that quiet strength still matters. And take a moment to comment below, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Different places, same moment, connected by the same lesson. If you value stories that honor integrity, courage, and real justice, subscribe and stay with us. Some stories don't shout, they stay with you and change how you see the world.